Scott Hoying is one of the most recognizable voices in contemporary a cappella, a baritone with a warmth and power that anchors the group's sound. He is, today, openly and joyfully gay, married to model Mark Manio since July 2023 and, as of late 2024, looking forward to building a family through surrogacy. The life he has now is one he fought to claim. But the fight was real, and the wounds it left were real, and it is worth understanding what he went through to reach this point. Scott grew up during a time and in a cultural environment that made being openly gay feel dangerous. Coming out during his teenage years was already a difficult journey. By the time Pentatonix was starting to gain visibility, the pressure intensified in a way that few people outside the entertainment industry would understand. As the group's profile began to rise, Scott was quietly warned, or came to believe, that being openly gay could hurt the group's chances of breaking through. He described the experience to Dallas Voice with brutal honesty. "I was essentially back in the closet again after working so hard to come out of it. The constant, grinding pressure to conform to something he was not, to hide a piece of himself that was fundamental to who he was, took a toll that he has spoken about with remarkable candor." His mother, Connie Hoying, understood the difficulty of that period deeply enough that she wrote a book about it. Released in 2025 entitled The Untold Story of Scott Hoying, Pentatonix star. The book details the emotional complexity of watching her son navigate fame while simultaneously wrestling with the need to conceal his identity. Speaking to GLAAD about the project, she recalled how difficult those years were for Scott, how much courage it took for him to keep performing with so much held back, and how the journey of self-acceptance was never simple or linear. Scott Hoying stands on stages now as his full, unguarded self. But he earned that freedom through years of suppression and pain that most people in the audience never imagined. Mitch Grassi is many things. A countertenor of staggering range, a fashion icon, a creative force with an almost otherworldly ability to inhabit the upper registers of the human voice. He is also a man who was faced one of life's most terrifying diagnoses while the entire world was watching. In 2016, Grassi revealed that he had been diagnosed with cancer. The news sent a wave of shock and grief through the Pentatonix fan community, and for good reason. Here was a young man at the height of his creative powers, in the middle of a career that was still ascending, facing a battle that had nothing to do with music or performance or ambition. It was a confrontation with mortality, plain and simple. Throughout his treatment, Grassi carried himself with a resilience that his fans found inspiring, even as they worried. He leaned on his bandmates, his family, and the outpouring of support from people around the world who had been moved by his voice. He came through it. But the experience of fighting cancer in public, having your weight changes scrutinized and speculated about, having your health become a topic of internet discussion, try and maintain some dignity while your body goes through something deeply private. That is not something that leaves a person unchanged. Grassi had long dealt with the particular cruelty of being a public figure whose physical appearance was treated as public property. When his weight changed noticeably over the years, the internet responded with a mix of concern. There are groups that come along once in a generation, groups that do not simply entertain, but redefine what is possible with human voices alone. Pentatonix is one of those groups. Since bursting onto the national stage by winning NBC's The Sing-Off in 2011, they have collected Grammy Awards, sold out arenas across the globe, topped the Billboard charts, and delivered holiday albums that have become staples in millions of households around the world. Their voices, layered and precise and emotionally overwhelming, have a way of reaching inside a listener and pulling something loose. For a group that has brought so much joy to so many people, it would be easy to assume that joy came naturally and effortlessly to each of them. It did not. Behind the harmonies, behind the sold-out shows and the glowing headlines and the viral YouTube videos that have now accumulated billions of views, every single member of Pentatonix has carried a private weight. Each one of them has walked through fire that their fans rarely saw. And understanding those struggles does not diminish the music. It deepens it. Because when you know what these 5 people endure to stand on a stage together and sing, the music means something it could not mean any other way. Kirsten Maldonado grew up in Arlington, Texas, with a voice that seemed to belong to someone far older and far more weathered than the girl who possessed it. She was drawn to performance from childhood, and from early on it was clear she was not simply talented. She was exceptional. But exceptional does not protect a person from cruelty, and Kirsten's early years were marked by something that no amount of vocal ability could deflect: bullying. In an interview on Party Foul Radio with Pollo and Pearl, Maldonado opened up about what it felt like to be on the receiving end of other people's meanness. She spoke about having to stand her ground, about learning that no one was going to come running to her rescue, and about the emotional labor of watching other people be cruel to one another. A bully is going to be a bully, she said, and you have to stand up for yourself. You can't expect everyone else is going to come and run to your aid. You have to stand your ground. That's very important. Those words were not a motivational slogan. They were earned. They were hard-won truths pulled from the kind of pain that leaves a mark. She took that pain and she did what artists do. She turned it into something. Her 2017 solo album, L.O.V., was in many ways a declaration of survival. Songs like Bad Weather were written as anthems of self-defense, inspired directly by her own experiences of being treated poorly and choosing to rise anyway. There was also heartbreak of a different kind. Before marrying Ben Hausdorff in April 2024, Kirsten had been engaged to actor Jeremy Michael Lewis, who proposed to her in Paris in front of the Eiffel Tower in 2016, a moment she described as stunning and joyful. But by 2017, that engagement quietly fell apart. The wedding was postponed over undisclosed relationship problems, and it never happened. A woman who would describe herself as so happy, there were no words, was left to rebuild something that had felt like a future. She did rebuild it, but the road between proposal and where she is now was longer and harder than anyone watching her perform at Christmas concerts would ever know. Culation and outright invasiveness. People projected narratives onto his body without his consent. He addressed it eventually, explaining that dietary changes were behind the transformation, that his choices were his own, and that the speculation had nothing to do with reality. But the fact that he had to address it at all, that a person fighting health battles and making personal choices about how he lived his life had to justify himself to strangers online, speaks to a particular kind of exhaustion that fame imposes on people who never asked to be examined so closely. Kevin Olusala is a prodigy by any measurable standard. He is a world-class beatboxer, a trained cellist, and fluent in Mandarin Chinese. He earned admission to Yale University, where he studied pre-med before choosing music as his path. The case for Kevin Olusala being one of the most multifaceted musical talents of his generation is an easy one to make, and has been made many times over by audiences who watch him perform. But behind that wall of achievement has always been a quieter and harder story. Kevin grew up as a person of color in America, and the doors that opened for him did not open easily. His parents immigrated to the United States, and as Kevin has described publicly, the opportunity available to people who look like his family was simply not the same as what was available to others. In a deeply personal Facebook video in June 2020, Olusala spoke about the structural inequities he and his family had faced, about his parents' determination to give their children better lives, and about the reality of what it meant to move through the world in a black body in America. Opportunity is not the same, or on equal footing. If you look like us, he said plainly. He described the extra work it required simply to be taken seriously, the constant need to prove himself, to put himself forward despite facing criticism from peers for doing so, to absorb the doubt and the dismissal, and keep going anyway. Every Grammy, every standing ovation, every jaw-dropping performance came on the other side of obstacles that most of his audience never had to think about. The music sounded effortless because Kevin is that good, but the path to that stage was never effortless, and his willingness to say so publicly took a kind of courage that deserves to be named. If there is one moment in Pentatonix history that carries the most grief, it is May 2017, the day Avi Kaplan, the deep, sonorous bass whose voice formed the very foundation of the group's sound, announced he was leaving. For millions of fans who had followed the group since their sing-off victory, it felt like something irreplaceable had been lost. But the tragedy of Avi's departure is not that he left. It is the reason why. In an emotional video posted to the group's Facebook page, Avi spoke with quiet devastation about what 6 years on the road at Pentatonix's level had done to him. It's been extremely hard for me to not be able to see my family and friends when I need to or when they need to see me, he said, his voice breaking. It's been really hard for me not to be able to just escape to nature when I'm feeling overwhelmed or when I just need time for myself. He was not describing inconvenience. He was describing the accumulated damage of years without rest, without roots, without the essential human connections that keep a person whole. The pace that Pentatonix maintained after winning the sing-off was extraordinary and relentless. Album after album, tour after tour, continent after continent. The machine of their success did not pause. For most of the members, the momentum was manageable, even thrilling. For Avi, who had always been a private and nature-grounded person, a man whose soul was drawn to folk music and quiet places long before Capella made him famous, it was slowly breaking something inside him. He stayed as long as he could. He gave as much as he had. And when there was nothing left to give without destroying himself, he chose to leave rather than hold the group back. His departure was ultimately an act of self-preservation, and that made it no less heartbreaking for the people who loved him. He has continued making music as a solo artist under the name of Real and the Sequoias, working in a folk tradition that was always his truest home. He is well, but the image of him in that farewell video, tearful, grateful, exhausted, trying to explain the unexplainable, is one that stays with you. There's a version of the Pentatonix story that is pure triumph. Grammy Awards and Billboard chart toppers and holiday albums that people have played every December for a decade. That version is real. The victories happened. The music is extraordinary. But there is another version, equally real, that lives behind and underneath the triumph. It is the story of a woman who was bullied and had her heart broken. A man who spent years hiding who he was because the world was not safe enough to let him be himself. A young artist who fought cancer while performing on global stages. A man of color who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition and chose to name that truth publicly. And a founding voice who loved the music so much that he gave it everything he had until he had nothing left and then quietly walked away. These are not separate stories from the music. They are the music. The grief and the resilience and the beauty and the cost all live inside those harmonies. When Pentatonix makes you feel something you cannot put into words, this is why. The people singing those notes know what loss feels like. They know what it is to hold something precious and fragile and fight to keep it alive. They have earned every note. And the least the rest of us can do is understand the full weight of what they carry when they step into the light and give it to us.